Part 2. Mr. Murdstone. Mr. Murdstone hated me.
What do I do,
He asked me.
if I have a dog or a horse that doesn't do what I want?
I don't know, I said.
I hit him.
Said Mr. Murdstone. I understood. My mother was gentle and kind. But when she wanted to kiss me, Mr. Murdstone and his sister said,
Clara, don't be silly. Be strong.
Mr. Murdstone gave me lessons. He asked difficult questions. I was very nervous and I couldn't answer.
If you don't study your lessons, we must punish you,
He said. My mother began to protest,
Be strong, Clara.
said Miss Murdstone. Her brother took me upstairs and began to hit me with a long cane. I turned my head. I bit his hand. He was very angry and hit me very hard. Then he closed the door and locked it. That night, Peggotty came to the door and said,
Master Davy, I love you. I'll look after you and your mother.
Finally, Mr. Murdstone unlocked the door. He sent me to a school near London. When I arrived, the headmaster, Mr. Creakle, put a notice on my back. It said, Be careful. He bites. It was a horrible school. Fortunately, I made 2 friends. One was a boy called Traddles, the other was Steerforth. He was a good-looking older boy and came from a rich family. He called me Daisy and protected me from the other boys and the teachers. Mr. Creakle was also afraid to hit Steerforth.
Give me your pocket money, Daisy,
Said Steerforth.
and I'll buy food and drink for everyone. The boys will all like you then.
He was my hero.
Gentle. The word gentle is an adjective. It means to become kind or soft. In the picture, the mother is gentle to her child. Upstairs. The word upstairs is an adverb. It means towards or on the highest floor or floors of a building. Notice. The word notice is a noun. It means a board, piece of paper, etc. etc means and many other things containing information or instructions. In the picture, we have the notice, the staff notice. Daisy. The word daisy is a noun. It means a small flower with white petals and a yellow center that often grows in grass. Petals. If you don't know the meaning of petals, look at the flower. That white thing is what we call petals. Many flowers have petals. A flower which looks like that is called daisy. Pocket money. Pocket money means an amount of money that parents regularly give to their child to spend as they choose. When pupils or students are going back to school, their parents usually give them some money. That money to spend at school is called pocket money. Hero. The word hero means a person who is admired for having done something very brave or having achieved something great. Admire means something you like, someone you like so much. In the picture, we have Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is a hero because he did many great things. A person who does great things for you is your hero. Funeral. The word funeral means a usually religious ceremony for burying or burning the body of a dead person. When you die, everything that happened to your body is called the funeral. In the picture, the dead person is there, the priest is praying for the dead and other people. Everything you see in the picture is what we call funeral. We begin the story. Part 2, Mr. Murderstone. Chapter 1 ended when David Copperfield was telling us that the happy days were finished. When Miss Murderstone came to the house, she asked for keys from David's mother. She offered to organize everything in the house. From that day, David Copperfield never saw happiness again, like we are going to see in part 2. Part 2, Mr. Murderstone. Mr. Murderstone was the man in black, the new father. David's father was dead. He died before David was born. David's mother got a new man. That man was called Mr. Murderstone. Let us read more about Mr. Murderstone. Mr. Murderstone hated me. What do I do? He asked me. If I have a dog or a horse that doesn't do what I want, I don't know, I said. I hit him, said Mr. Murderstone. Mr. Murderstone hated David Copperfield. David was a boy around 10 years, but Mr. Murderstone hated him. Why? Why do you hate a young boy? I understood. My mother was gentle and kind. The mother was nice, was calm, treated David like any other mother. David was a very happy boy when he was a child. But his problems came when his mother got married to Mr. Murderstone. But when she wanted to kiss me, Mr. Murderstone and his sister said, "Clara, don't be silly." Silly means stupid. Be strong. Mr. Murderstone gave me lessons. He asked difficult questions. I was very nervous and I couldn't answer. Nervous means afraid, fear. David was afraid, was nervous. Why? Mr. Murderstone hated him, he beat him, he asked him difficult questions. When they were together, he could not answer anything. He was nervous, he was full of fear. Then Mr. Murderstone told him, "If you don't study your lessons, we must punish you," he said. My mother began to protest. David's mother began to say, "No, you cannot treat my boy like that." Be strong, Clara, said Miss Murdstone. Like Miss Murdstone always said, she said, be strong, Clara. Her brother took me upstairs. Who is the brother? Mr. Murdstone. Mr. Murdstone is Miss Murdstone's brother. I want you to see the word is Miss, M-I-S-S. A woman who is not married is called Miss. Miss Murdstone was not married. He was Mr. Murdstone's sister. Mr. Murdstone began to hit me with a long cane. A cane is a stick used to beat people or animals. I turned my head. I bit his hand. Bit is the past simple of bite. He was very angry and hit me hard. Why was he angry? Because David Copperfield bit his hand. Then he closed the door and locked it. That night, Peggotty came to the door and said, Master Davy, I love you. I'll look after you and your mother. I'll look after you and your mother. Finally, Mr. Murdstone unlocked the door. He sent me to a school near London. Now we go to another part of the chapter. The first part was David living with Mr. and Miss Murdstone with the mother. They treated him very badly. Time came when Mr. Murdstone sent him to school. When I arrived at school, the headmaster, Mr. Crickle, we have a new character, Mr. Crickle, put a notice on my back. The headmaster wrote something and put it on my back. It said, be careful, he bites. Remember, David Copperfield bit the hand of Mr. Murdstone. Mr. Murdstone took David to school and told the headmaster. She told the headmaster to punish David. It was a horrible school. Horrible means terrible. Terrible means very bad. Fortunately means the good side. Like we have seen, almost all David's life is horrible, is terrible. But fortunately, I made 2 friends. The only good thing at that school was David made friends. One was a boy called Traddles. The other was Steerforth. The 2 friends were Traddles and Steerforth. He was a good-looking older boy and came from a rich family. Steerforth was good-looking. He came from a rich family, and he was older than most boys. He called me Daisy. Daisy is a type of flower and protected me from the other boys and the teachers. Mr. Crickle was also afraid to hit Steerforth. Mr. Crickle, the headmaster, was afraid. Why? Steerforth was from a rich family, and students from rich families are always feared by everybody. Give me your pocket money, Daisy. Pocket money means the money given to a student or a pupil when he or she is going to school, said Steerforth. and I'll buy food and drink for everyone. The boys will all like you then because I would have bought for them food and drink. He was my hero. Who was his hero? Steerforth. Who is a hero? A hero is someone who does something great for you. Steerforth had protected David from the other boys and the teacher. Steerforth had shown love to David Copperfield. He was the only person who loved him.
When Mr. Peggotty and Ham visited me, I introduced them to my new friend and protector. When I returned home for the summer, my mother had a new baby. I wanted to hold my little brother, but the Murdstones sent me upstairs. I was very sad and was happy to return to Mr. Creakle's school. On my birthday, Mr. Creakle called me to his room.
Was your mother well when you left her?
His wife asked. I didn't answer. I knew there was a problem.
She's ill.
Mrs. Creakle said. I began to cry.
She's very ill.
She said. Now I understood.
She's dead.
I cried and cried. I went home immediately. Peggotty told me about my mother's death, and she told me how the baby also died. After the funeral, Peggotty sat with me in my room and comforted me. Miss Murdstone said,
We don't need a servant.
and Peggotty left. But first, she took me away to see her family in the boathouse. It was good to see Mr. Peggotty and Ham and little Emily. Peggotty decided to marry Mr. Barkis.
I will always love you, Master Davy.
She promised.
I'll always be here to help you.
When I returned home, Mr. Murdstone didn't speak to me for a long time. Then one day he said,
Education is expensive, David. You must go to London and learn to be independent in the world.
When Mr. Peggotty and Ham visited me, I introduced them to my new friend and protector. Who is Mr. Peggotty? Mr. Peggotty was Peggotty's brother. Who is Peggotty? Peggotty was the servant. He loved David. She was there when David was born, and Ham visited him. I introduced them to my new friend and protector. Who was the protector? Steerforth. When I returned home for the summer holiday, my mother had a new baby. Now we have left school, we have gone back home. The mother had a new baby. The father was Mr. Murdstone. I wanted to hold my little brother, but the Murdstones with S means Mr. and Miss Murdstone, set me upstairs. They never wanted David to talk or to hold his brother. I was very sad and was happy to return to Mr. Creakle's school. On my birthday, Mr. Creakle called me to his room. Was your mother well when you left her? His wife asked. I didn't answer. I knew there was a problem. She's ill. Mrs. Creakle, Mrs. MRS, that is for a woman who is married. A woman, the title of a woman who is not married is Miss MISS. Mrs. Creakle, Mr. Creakle's wife, said, I began to cry. David cried because his mother was ill, very sick. She's very ill, she said. Now I understood. She's dead. David's mother was dead. Now David was alone in the world. He was an orphan, no mother, no father. I cried and cried. I went home immediately. Pigotty told me about my mother's death. And she told me how the baby also died. The brother also died. The poor David Copperfield had no mother, no father, no sister, no brother, and no one loved him. He was a young boy alone in the world. The people he stayed with hated him. Mr. and Miss Murderstone hated him. After the funeral, Pigotty sat with me in my room and comforted me. The only person who was there for David was Pigotty. Comfort, she encouraged him. She supported him. She told him sweet words. Remember, this is a boy. Miss Murderstone said, "We don't need a servant," and Pigotty left. The only person who still loved David was told to go away. But first, she took me away to see her family in the boathouse. Her family, Mr. Pigotty, Ham, Emily, they lived on the coast, remember. It was good to see Mr. Pigotty and Ham and little Emily. Pigotty decided to marry Mr. Bacchus. Mr. Bacchus, the local carrier, the transporter, married Pigotty, the servant. "I will always love you, Master David," she promised. Who promised? Pigotty. Pigotty was the only person who loved David. When I returned home, Mr. Murderstone didn't speak to me for a long time. When David came back from visiting Pigotty's family, Mr. Murderstone refused to speak to him. He was a young boy, alone, and the family, the people who were supposed to look after him, hated him. They did not talk to him. They did not say anything. Then, one day, he said, "Education is expensive, David. You must go to London and learn to be independent in the world." David had to go to London to start to work. Why? Because education is expensive. But this is a boy. 10 years is supposed to be school. The problem, David had no mother, no father, no sister, no one. And when you don't have your parents, this is what usually happens. Charles Dickens is trying to tell us a story of how orphans suffered in England at that time. But that's what happens to many orphans even here in Africa. That is the end of chapter 2. I hope you enjoyed the story. See you next time in chapter 3.